I just want to get a sense from what your gut might be telling you. If you could just show me a wave of your hand why you think people are taking de-extinction seriously. Is it possibly just because we can and it would be crazy cool to see a woolly mammoth or something similar? Such a sober group, oh my gosh, wow. You guys are really ethical. Happy Friday. It's nice to be here with all of you. And I'm excited to be able to just chat a little bit about what I've discovered while writing this book, Rise of the Necrofauna, over the last few years. It's about this puzzling area in science where researchers are trying to recreate close versions of extinct species. And I'll begin with an image that hopefully means something to everyone in this room. It's certainly the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about de-extinction, right? So dinosaurs, Jurassic Park, we know that this image represents a story where scientists go out on a limb to recreate the most iconic species that ever walked this planet. But we also know that it's an image about a story that warns us that if we act too closely on human hubris, we might get bitten badly, because as Jeff Goldblum's character says in the film, when we try to control life, life finds a way to break free of that grip. In real life de-extinction, though, we don't have to worry about dinosaurs. It's totally out of the question. The reality is that these guys have been gone for nearly 66 million years, and that's far too long to be able to salvage any useful bits of their DNA from their fossilized remains. And that's the thing that you need first when doing de-extinction, good quality chunks of DNA to be able to work with. And the specimen that scientists have been able to do this with, that is the oldest, is a 700,000-year-old horse. And that's just a fraction of the time that dinosaurs have been missing, and we start to understand then why it's impossible to work with this species. You may have heard about the woolly mammoth project happening at Harvard, or the passenger pigeon resurrection, the Tasmanian tiger, gastric brooding frog, which is a type of frog that was able to turn its stomach into a uterus and actually gave birth to its tadpoles jumping out of its mouth. There's a bunch of other charismatic species, the aurochs, the extinct ancestor to all of today's living cattle, the heath hen, and there's a few others. And this is all happening at a moment where we understand that we're in a biodiversity crisis. The extinction rate right now is 1,000 times higher than what the normal background extinction rate says it should be. And many scientists call this the 6th mass extinction. We know that there are 5 other moments of extreme species obliteration that have happened on the planet. And now what's unique about this 6th one is that it's caused by a single species rather than, let's say, a meteor crashing into the Earth or a bunch of volcanic activity. And of course, that single species is us. So why might we be focusing on trying to recreate extinct species when all these endangered species are further falling over the brink? I just want to get a sense from what your gut might be telling you. If you could just show me a wave of your hand why you think people are taking de-extinction seriously. Is it possibly just because we can and it would be crazy cool to see a woolly mammoth or something similar? Such a sober group, oh my gosh, wow. You guys are really ethical. Is it because we maybe feel guilty for making all these species go extinct and we're trying to atone for our ecological sins somehow? You're like, no. Okay, what about because we can learn from it and advance science? It's a big research extension project, basically. For the foundational knowledge it'll produce. What about because it might actually do something beneficial for failing ecosystems? It could be a conservation tool. Little bit. So I have heard all of these reasons being put forth as why the scientists at the helm of these projects are working on them, but as an overarching movement in science, it is a developing field. It's only this last reason that gets used to justify why we should take it seriously. The main theory here is called ecological restoration, and it basically connects with the idea that at some point in an ecosystem there was a keystone species, so certain species that had a really important functional role to play that kept dynamics between flora and fauna productively healthy, and when it disappeared, all those relationships broke down. So now that we have a variety of cloning and gene editing and breeding technologies that can allow us to create close versions of extinct species that would have the traits to recreate that keystone activity of that species, then if we put that kind of animal that we make back into the environment, we can correct or fill in some of those holes that we've reaped in nature. But how do we choose candidates? I mean, before we get to the science, there's other issues we've got to think of, because 99.9% of all species that ever lived are already known to be gone. So we've got umpteen choices to choose from. How are we going to pick in a way that's ecologically responsible? Are we just going to make what the futurist Alex Steffen has called charismatic necrofauna, and that's where I get the idea for the book title. And by that he means, are we just going to choose those animals that are majestic or cuddly or beautiful or that look back at us with a spark of intelligence and somehow make us feel good, while we prefer that all the slithery, slimy, creepy, crawly, less charismatic species stay in their graves forever? We already have this kind of bias riddled throughout conservation efforts. We tend to galvanize public support for pandas, while we don't mind that all the snakes just stay forever forgotten. But there are heavyweights paying attention to this, such as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They're the worldwide authority on threatened species. They manage the red list, which says, how endangered is a certain species and so on. And they say de-extinction is coming down the pipe, whether we like it or not, so we'd better get ahead of the ball and make some protocols to influence policy about how we should select candidates. And so they've made this tier of scrutiny that each candidate, they say, has to pass through in order to be taken seriously. So 1, is there available habitat? Are there available food sources? Do we know climate change is not going to threaten that habitat in the foreseeable future? What about keeping these animals safe from humans who may want to hunt them? In many cases, we hunted them to extinction the first time, so who's to say that we won't just create a new paradigm of extinction where an animal can go extinct twice? So there's all sorts of issues that are being written about now. It's not the amount of species being worked on that's really so captivating about this field, but it's the societal, environmental, ethical, moral, scientific questions that allow it to punch so well above its weight.